Hey guys, it's Trafotin. A question I often get asked is, how do you edit your videos? And the answer is, I use DaVinci Resolve. While a lot of programs that I use and promote are open source programs that respect your freedom and your privacy and your rights and your ability to edit and distribute it, but I have tried every other open source video editor out there, and all of them have disappointed me. Instead, I settled on DaVinci Resolve, one of the most popular free, as in cost, video editors. And it's been growing in popularity since Adobe continues to push their users to the brink with increasing subscription fees and AI chicanery. While it might not be as feature-filled as something like Premiere, Resolve gets the job done and beyond most of its competition in the free video editor space, and is actually one of the few commercial companies that supports a Linux version of their software. And I'm all about paying for a good product. If you use a product, whether it's your favorite open source software project or a proprietary program that does something you want, and if you like it, give them your money and show them your support. This especially goes for desktop Linux users, because meeting one in real life is the equivalent of finding a unicorn in your local forest. If you pay for a product and you like how it works, then you show your support by making sure that your company continues to offer that thing. But emphasis on works, because if you scour the internet of people trying to run DaVinci Resolve, people complain about not getting it to work. On Linux especially, it's an even greater uphill battle, and I want to walk through some of those issues, some solutions, and debunking some common claims that I've seen online about how DaVinci Resolve functions on Linux right now, and some solutions we can do to get around it. First, we have the Codec Conundrum. Resolve paywall specific types of video codecs, or video formats, from working properly on your device. Now, certain video codecs, like AAC audio, which is the standard of audio for MP4 files, doesn't work at all. Never mind AAC audio, but MP4 files might not work at all. And it's probably easy to point the finger at Blackmagic Design and to say, well, they're crippling Linux users, but the reality is they aren't the enemy here. Did you know that the most popular video codec for MP4 and QuickTime files, H.264, is run by the MPEG-LA, or as I call them, the scummy patent squatting body that monopolizes on the video that you use on your computer and your phone? Google, Microsoft, and Apple have to pay the MPEG-LA truckloads of money every year. And the only reason you know this is if you read the end user license agreement for their devices, because every one of you do, right? Nobody likes them, and especially these companies that pay them. And it's gotten so bad that they are trying to promote their own alternative, an open source, patent-free standard called AV1. The AV1 codec will finally put an end to the reign of terror that is the monopolization of the H.264 video. Now, if you use the paid version of DaVinci Resolve, you might not have to worry about this as much, but if you still use the free version of DaVinci Resolve, or if you use the paid version in less scenarios, you will have to convert existing media that you have that isn't compatible with DaVinci Resolve's player encoding or decoding, basically the stuff that lets you edit video. And you can use tools like FFmpeg, or if you're more comfortable with a GUI tool, Handbrake, to convert video and audio into your desired formats. I typically use NVIDIA's NVENC H.264 because it's supported with hardware decoding and encoding on my device. But if you don't want to pay money, and especially if you don't want to give in to the crappy thing that is the MPEG-LA, use AV1 and support the future standard. If you actually have a newer graphics card, hardware acceleration is natively supported on it. It's okay, guys, I know it's stressful to memorize all of these Linux terminal commands, but you don't have to thank me. All you have to do is thank the broken thing that is the American patent system for letting a company monopolize on things that people use. The second problem you'll probably encounter is distro choice. Resolve is incredibly picky about what Linux distribution you choose. Forget about running that Debian or Ubuntu-based distribution because Resolve will not work easily. So instead of being restricted to what distro you want to use, we can use a program like Distrobox, where we can construct a GUI, Docker, or Podman container where we can manage an installation of DaVinci Resolve totally separate from the rest of our machine, and get GPU acceleration without having to try to do virtual machine pass-through or whatever as if we were trying to natively run Resolve on a Windows virtual machine. Also really cool, Distrobox natively integrates that application as if it was a GUI program that you run directly on your host OS. And you gain access to running other programs on other operating systems. So that way you have a stable environment where you can run Resolve and it will almost always be the same. In order to be using Resolve officially, we're going to have to use Rocky Linux, which is lacking in hardware support as a container distribution. So let's go further upstream. And I'm not talking about like Alma Linux or CentOS Stream, I'm talking about Fedora. Since Rocky Linux is a fork of Red Hat, we can use Fedora, which is a more bleeding edge, but also up-to-date version of Linux that has all of the hardware support that we need, and especially might be lacking if you're using one of the Red Hat-based server-esque distributions. Inside the container, we're going to have to run a series of commands that install DaVinci Resolve's libraries and the prerequisite libraries for your GPU. And you're going to have to install the corresponding ones based on whether you have an NVIDIA GPU or an AMD GPU. And don't forget RPM Fusion so you can play those freaking patented codecs that the MPEG-LA doesn't like. And then you can extract the package from the Resolve website and then open it in a terminal and run it with sudo, and then install it graphically just like you would on Mac and Windows. Well, I mean, if you're okay with doing a / and dragging something into a terminal, that is. Well, now you've installed your container, you've installed Resolve, it obviously must work now, right? Instead, what you need to do is you need to replace Resolve's pre-packaged libraries. Since Resolve is based off of Rocky Linux, it's running older libraries, and we need to get rid of those older libraries and replace them with the new, up-to-date libraries. And what I actually do is I copy over the files from the Fedora container and move them into the library folder of the Resolve container. That way you get up-to-date codecs. Apparently the libraries are out of date so much and so crusty and old that what you need to do is you need to download an older version of the libraries that exist in Fedora and replace them with an archived copy. And you can go to the link that I have to the Wayback Machine in case you need to download it. Don't worry, it's officially signed by Fedora and it's from an official Fedora repository. What you need to do is you need to run an RPM command to extract all of the files from the package, and then you're going to copy all files that are in the lib64 folder and put them into the Resolve library folder. Now you've probably gone through all of these steps and you're like, wow, that was a lot of work, but we're finally done now. And the free users are probably like, yes, I now have DaVinci working on Linux, I can go and use it. And you probably can. That is, unless you're a paid user like me. And I've had to do a lot of experimentation on this one, and it's been incredibly frustrating. But let me tell you about my findings. I am a paid user of DaVinci Resolve, and you can obtain a paid license through one of two ways. The first method is you use a dongle, which you plug into your computer, but I don't want to use a dongle, so instead I chose an internet-activated registration code. But this got into my first set of problems. If you are a crazy person who hardens Linux because you value your privacy and security, DaVinci Resolve will not allow you to use a randomized MAC address. When you use the internet on your computer, what Resolve will do is it will check for your device's vendor OUI. And what this basically means is it's looking for a unique hardware identifier to bind to your device. That way it'll build a certificate or something and it stores it somewhere in its folder, and then it uses that certificate to verify that your file's correct. And you can actually verify this if you run a packet capture on your network, and you'll see that DaVinci Resolve Studio will phone home to your local device's network, looking for that MAC address. So that way it doesn't have to constantly call the internet and burden all of Resolve servers. And instead it will call your local network and just give a simple question of, hey, is this vendor OUI the same? And if yes, then it will just let you boot up Resolve and everything's going to be fine. But if it's not, what's going to happen is they're going to boot you out and make you activate your code again. And you might run out of activations because you tested it that much. And I'm totally not speaking from experience here. Let me warn you right now. If you use a random MAC address of DaVinci Resolve Studio, it will prevent you from keeping your device activated. You need to make this change on your host OS, the one that you use for your daily work. You must make that change on your host OS. If you don't make that change on your host OS, well, you're using a container. It's not going to let you anyway. And if you don't, you're going to have problems activating the studio version of Resolve. So if you use the internet activated code version of the studio of Resolve, you cannot use a random MAC address because it needs to access your vendor OUI, which uniquely identifies your device. And that's how it binds everything. Now, what a certain Windward whispered into my ear told me about this thing called Flat Tire's Resolve box scripts. Now, one of the things I want to discuss here is he actually talks about machine ID, and I actually have tested this. Resolve doesn't check your Linux machine ID, and now it's also clear if you read Flat Tire's README that he thinks it could be possible, and it definitely is. But that's not actually what's happening. I tested this on my main machine by changing my unique Linux machine ID, which is a randomized ID, which is automatically generated when you install Linux. You can change this ID or delete it because it's something that identifies your device, but it's not horribly critical to like the major role of running your device. So if you delete it, you're probably not going to lose sleep over it and your device will continue to work just fine. But one of the things you can do is you can actually change this to the Whonix ID. The people who design KickSecure, or the Whonix developers, what they do is, in order to prevent the detection of uniqueness of their Linux users, what they do is they change the machine ID so that all of their users have the exact same machine ID. And what I did was just that. I copied over the Whonix machine ID and made it the machine ID of my computer. And if you're running a newer version of my script, you will actually get to have the Whonix machine ID, and it'll have practically no impact here. And it has no impact on Resolve's install. I just thought I would point that out because I know that's a question that's asked. They are not using the machine ID. What they're using is they're looking for your vendor MAC address of your network device. And they check both Ethernet and Wi-Fi. Well, now that we've converted all of our media, we've created a Distrobox container, we have DaVinci Resolve running inside the Distrobox container with the correct libraries, we've solved our crazy activation problem because we're weirdos who harden Linux, but wait, if you're a laptop user, we might be in more trouble. If you're a laptop user, you might get occasionally pinged with warnings that say your GPU is full. Huh? What? GPU is full, but computer, I can play Cyberpunk 2077 just fine. How come I can't run DaVinci Resolve? Well, the reason you can't run DaVinci Resolve is because of this pesky little thing called Discrete GPU Handoff. If you use a container, you need to be able to hand off the container to the discrete GPU so that you can make proper use of GPU acceleration, because that's what's required in order to run Resolve. And sometimes if you use a discrete GPU, it doesn't communicate correctly. If you're a desktop user, do not freak out. You will probably not experience this at all. So if you have a laptop GPU, you might be in a little bit of trouble. And I haven't found the solution for this just yet. This is where I'm begging people for help, because the documentation of Switcheroo links to a 404 page on GNOME's documentation and tells you absolutely nothing about what's going on. Hopefully, after all of that, you have installed DaVinci Resolve. And as my gift to you, I have developed a script or series of scripts to help run this. Ideally, I would like this to be something clean, like one script where you can just run it and it will install either the free version or the paid version of DaVinci Resolve, and it will just magically set up a Distrobox container with all of your stuff inside, and it will just work. And if you do this, you can install DaVinci Resolve probably have a lot less headache than I had to deal with, because that's what I do. I deal with all the problems so you don't have to. And if you like to support my kooky little ventures, consider donating me money on Patreon. And why don't you just go leave a like on this video? If you leave a like on this video, maybe I will try the Affinity Suite inside of bottles. Aren't you? Oh, isn't that a great idea to get you guys interested? Thanks for watching, guys. Go out there and use DaVinci Resolve, because I'm sure as hell ain't using anything else right now.